Now, media rights group Reporters Without Borders has called on the United Nations Security Council to convene an emergency session in the aftermath of the targeting killings of 6 Palestinian journalists in Gaza by Israel's military. Al Jazeera reporters Anas Al-Sharif and 5 of his colleagues became the latest journalists to be killed in the ongoing war in Gaza, taking the death toll of journalists and media workers to more than 240. According to the UN figures, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres echoed sentiments expressed by the organization's Human Rights Office, condemning the killing as a grave breach of international humanitarian law.
The Secretary General condemns the killing of the 6 Palestinian journalists in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza City on August 10th. These latest killings highlight the extreme risks that journalists continue to face when covering this ongoing conflict. The Secretary General calls for an independent and impartial investigation into these latest killings. At least 242 journalists have been killed in Gaza since the war began. Journalists and media workers must be respected, they must be protected, and they must be allowed to carry out their work freely, free from fear and free from harassment.
That is one of many. We've seen the killing of more than 200 journalists in the past 2 years in Gaza. This is an unprecedented number. Among this very high toll, we know that according to our information and the proof that we've collected and the elements that we have, at least 50 of those journalists were targeted or killed because of their work. This crime against the press, against journalism, will not stop as long as impunity continues. We are calling for a very strong international reaction to the strike, to all of these crimes that I've just listed. We're also calling on the UN Security Council to convene urgently in order to apply Resolution 2222, which is a resolution that guarantees the protection of journalists working in conflict zones. It was created for that. International law must be respected. Anas Al-Sharif and a number of his colleagues is not new. We've seen it, we had already denounced it, we considered that the proof given was completely insufficient. The answers we got from the Israeli government were not at all satisfactory. We had denounced these accusations back in October, and we were aware and following the threats and accusations against Anas for a very long time. Many of them were public. We regularly checked up on him. Anas did not want to leave Gaza, not that this is a possibility, unfortunately, for any of the journalists today with the blockade that's imposed, but he wanted to remain and to work. For some point, he was one of the very few journalists who were continuing to work in the north of Gaza. We denounced the accusations that were made against him. We denounced them publicly in a statement last October.
Right, for more, we speak to our correspondent at the United Nations in New York, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, a very good evening to you. There have been very strong statements of condemnation from not just the UN, but a number of media rights groups. Perhaps give us a breakdown of the reaction that you've been tracking so far throughout the course of the day.
Yeah, global condemnation and certainly import from a number of rights groups. Feedback in my ear, if we can get that out, please. The Foreign Press Association condemns the killings of Al Jazeera journalist Anas Al-Sharif and 5 of his colleagues. It's even more appalling given that the Israeli governments acknowledged that it was a targeted assassination. The media team was working in a tent outside of Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City at the time, fearlessly reporting on the suffering of Palestinian people and bearing witness to now well-documented war crimes committed by Israeli forces. The killing comes as Israel blocks international media from Gaza and prepares to drive nearly 1 million people from Gaza City with no credible evidence. Israel has accused Al-Sharif of working for Hamas. And Paul, the Committee to Protect Journalists, also weighing in, CPJ, is appalled by Israel's killing in Gaza on Sunday of 5 Al Jazeera staff as well as freelance journalist Mohammed Al-Khaldi. Israel has a long-standing documented pattern of accusing journalists of being terrorists without providing credible proof. CPJ also put out a statement in July expressing its grave concerns that Anas Al-Sharif's safety was in peril after he was accused by an Israeli military spokesperson of being a Hamas operative. So they kind of flagged this before it actually happened, weeks before it happened. The International Federation of Journalists, IFJ, joins its affiliate, the Palestinian Journalist Syndicate, in condemning in the strongest possible terms the deliberate targeting of journalists. They also urge all UN member states to adopt a binding international convention for the safety of journalists. And then, of course, we heard from Reporters Without Borders. I'll just echo what they said there. Reporters Without Borders condemns this disgraceful tactic which is repeatedly used against journalists to cover up war crimes, while the army has already killed more than 200 media professionals and poor.
Now, Sherwin, while the deaths of journalists draw greater scrutiny, the broader takeaway from this incident and others is that no civilians in Gaza are safe as this war grinds on amid the expectations of an Israeli military escalation in Gaza City. Not so?
Absolutely right. I mean, just look at the breadth of the devastation you are seeing in Gaza, right? The majority of the 60,000 plus that have been killed are civilians. Numbers like 18,000 children among the dead. 18,000 children, worth repeating that number. 12,000 women, right, as part of the 60,000 plus. And that doesn't even speak to some of the lack of recovery of bodies that, you will still find under the devastation that is Gaza, the rubble that is there. And it's important to understand what international humanitarian law says in that regard. Under international humanitarian law, journalists are considered civilians and are entitled to protection from attack during armed conflict, and intentionally targeting journalists is a war crime, right? The IDF, the military here, has said it specifically targeted this group of journalists, including Mr. Al-Sharif, in that tent outside Al-Shifa in Gaza City because they believed he was a Hamas terrorist. If that is proved to be not true, then they have assassinated a journalist here, and that is a war crime. And let me remind you that this is the essence as to why South Africa has taken Israel to the International Court of Justice, citing allegations of genocide that the judges of the ICJ will have to verify and affirm or dismiss, but also recall that the judges of the International Criminal Court have laid war crimes charges against the Prime Minister of Israel and his former defense minister, citing war crimes in relation to using starvation as a war crime. So, all these elements, all these different angles as to what is going on in Gaza really points to the impunity we are seeing here, not in terms of just the targeting of journalists, but the targeting of civilians writ large.
Absolutely. Sherwin, we all, of course, recall the killing of Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh in May of 2022 while she was covering a raid in Jenin in the occupied West Bank, which also drew global attention and condemnation at that time. More than 3 years on, what do we know about the status of bringing her killers to justice?
Yeah, May 2022, I believe it was, Mpho. And of course, it was a big international topic. We covered it, you covered it, we all covered it. And I was just sort of reading up as to the latest as to where that case is. And according to a concluded IDF investigation, which was released months after that May 22 attack, September 2022, they admitted that there was a high probability that Shireen Abu Akleh was shot and killed by Israeli fire while covering an Israeli military operation in the West Bank in Jenin in May of 2022. But that investigation determined that it was not possible to unequivocally determine the source of the gunfire which hit and killed Ms. Abu Akleh. The IDF did not pursue, as we understand, any criminal charges against those who might have been suspected of that killing. So again, here you have a case where the evidence points to the IDF, but the IDF itself not holding the soldiers who were perhaps behind the firing of Shireen Abu Akleh responsible criminally here. And so justice is still vacant in that instance, as is justice certainly in terms of determining exactly what happened with the attack in Gaza City on Sunday.
Yeah. Very, very well. Thank you so much. Our U.S. correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease there, bringing us the latest and, of course, some details on the reaction that's been garnered around the killing of a journalist in Gaza City.